Good afternoon, Louisiana. Welcome to Odds and Ends for Monday, December the 6th. Zach Ewing with Devin Jackson here with you on this rainy Monday afternoon. Is it raining down there in New Orleans, Devin?
Yeah, it started about 15-20 minutes ago, and it's been coming down pretty hard.
Oh, it's been raining here for about 2 hours, so you may be missing the worst of it here in Baton Rouge. We're getting pounded. Jim Derry is not with us today. He is out sick, so we hope Jim feels better. I think it's legitimate. I don't think it's a reaction to another bad week of big bucks. It could be both. I don't know. But I think he's legitimately sick, so we hope we wish him well. It's funny. Every week, Jim is more confident in his picks, and every week he crashes and burns harder. I have to. What do we started with $2,000. Let me check my math here. Jim is down to $436.
Oh,
so
wow.
We've still got 5 weeks left. He's not here to defend himself, so I'm not going to go in too hard here. We'll wait for At the Book on Thursday to do that. But yeah, it was another wasteland for Jim Derry. He liked a lot of upsets on Saturday, and there actually were some upsets, just not the ones he picked. He's big on Iowa and Houston, and those didn't come out for him. So anyway, Devin, another good week for you. Another good weekend of football. We've got a college football playoff. We got lots to talk about.
Yeah, it was an exciting weekend, lived up to the billing. The biggest games actually didn't turn out to be great, but some of those other kind of deciders for the college football playoff games were great. Oklahoma State and Baylor was a classic, but everything else, it was either a blowout or one team pretty much handled it pretty much thoroughly. So it was definitely one of those weekends where, it basically you're waiting till Sunday and see who's in and who's not. But we pretty much knew what was going to happen Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment, probably like 3:30, 3:45 Saturday afternoon where you had this unbelievable Baylor-Oklahoma State game. Cincinnati looked like they were in a dogfight. Georgia was up 10-0 on Alabama. And so you think, okay, well, if Alabama loses and they get blown out here and it's 38-3, who gets in? Could Baylor get in? Notre Dame gets in? Who could Iowa get in if they beat Michigan? And it just seemed like the possibilities were endless. And then 2 hours later, by 5:30, Alabama had control, Cincinnati had control. You're like, okay, well, I guess we figured this out as long as Michigan wins tonight. And then Michigan, of course, no drama in that one either. So it was pretty cut and dry who was going to be in the playoff. And we'll talk more about that as the show goes on here. This is Odds and Ends on bet.NOLA.com. Zach Ewing with Devin Jackson here with you. We're brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. And we would, of course, like to remind you that you can sign up for the Caesar Sportsbook app by going to NOLA.com/Caesars. And when you do that, you can't bet yet, but you can get that $100 bonus if you deposit some money before the launch of mobile betting. Best guess is we're about a month away from that. Fingers crossed that we may have it in time for the NFL playoffs, maybe even the national championship game on January the 10th. So go to NOLA.com/Caesars. Be ready. Get that Christmas money in there and get your $100 bonus, your little holiday gift from Caesar Sportsbook and bet.NOLA.com. Let's talk quickly about tonight's game. We're going to switch gears to the NFL because it is a big Monday Night Football game. In fact, we've got another one coming next week, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. But Patriots and Bills, this is about as good of a game as you'll get on Monday Night Football. Control of the AFC East on the line. Really, control of the AFC in general could be on the line. You see the total there is down to 40.5. Early in the week, it was 45. Devin, I don't know if you've seen the video. It is howling wind in Orchard Park, New York right now. I mean, it's windy outside here, but it looks like Wizard of Oz compared to this at Ralph Wilson Stadium.
It'll be interesting to see how it affects the game. I mean, the Bills kind of live on that deep passing kind of attack, and with wins like that, I don't know if you want to attempt passes like that. So if it were to turn to kind of a run type of game, it definitely favors the Patriots of the two teams. They're definitely the more polished running team, but it should be probably a defensive battle, and it makes sense why the over-under is starting to dip here.
Yeah, it's It's interesting. I agree with you. I think the Patriots get the advantage if it's windy. I should note I guess the high wind advisory there in Buffalo is only in effect until 7:00 Eastern. So they do expect, and the game, of course, is at 8:20 Eastern. So they do expect the winds to die down a little bit. And then, you also see videos of these flags whipping around above a stadium. Well, what's really important is what the wind is like on the field, not necessarily a couple hundred feet above the field. So that's those are both factors too. I'll ask you this, Devin, though, with the over/under down to 40.5, you expect the defense to struggle. How low is too low for you to bet the under? I mean, if it gets down into the 30s, at what point do you start being contrarian and saying, I think maybe it does go over?
Anything below probably 36 or 37. I think 40 is kind of pushing it now, because I do think that they're going to find, break through and find ways to score. These two defenses are solid, but they're not like shutout type of defenses. And the Patriots have been playing really well as of late. But this could very well turn to a shootout if, both teams kind of get in the stride. So I think it's pushing it now at 40.5. And anything lower than that, I don't know if I would take the under if it was under like 38 or 37 points total.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it gets down there, you've got to be contrarian and take the over. 40.5 is almost too low for me. And the reason being is because turnovers can cause the total to go up too. And the high winds could also mean turnovers. I mean, let's say, just hypothetically, New England gets out to a 10-0 lead, a 14-0 lead with its running game, and Buffalo decides they have to throw. Okay, they have to throw, which means they're going to go higher tempo. They're going to get some chunks of yards. They might score some points, but also there might be some Josh Allen interceptions, which he's been known to do. Sets the Patriots up with short fields. All of a sudden, you're into a 28-13 range or a 28-17 range or something, and you've gone over a 40.5. So I'm wary of it already. I do think if it keeps dipping down below 40, I may put a little bit on the over tonight. I'm already on the Patriots +3. I think if I can get that 3, I really like my chances to at least walk away with a push tonight. This is Odds and Ends on bet.NOLA.com. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button for us. If you've got comments, feel free to leave them. We will get to your comments live here on the show. And we're talking a little NFL, a little Monday Night Football, New England and Buffalo tonight. Let's look back at yesterday, though. Let's look back at the Sunday that was in the NFL and the Thursday that was, for that matter, starting with the Saints, 27-17. You were on the text chain. I think you were kind of an innocent bystander, Devin. Jim Derry and I were going at it pretty hard on Thursday night about, his idea was the Saints need to start Taysom Hill. Trevor Siemian is the problem. And Taysom Hill had his moments. He hurdled the defender. He was obviously playing hurt at the end of that game, which could have been a factor with his torn tendon in his finger. The Saints' problems go a lot deeper than that, though. I mean, the reason he hurt his finger in the first place is because they can't protect anybody right now. The offensive line is banged up. The running game is banged up. The wide receivers have been terrible all year. Like the defense gets worn down, even though it's pretty solid to start with. They've got a lot of problems that go beyond the quarterback in my eyes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've kind of become used to the Saints being undermanned this season and finding ways to win and finding ways to be competitive. But the reality is you can't have as many injuries as they have and still be a playoff team. It's just tough. I mean, you're down, and I saw tweets from earlier today from like Jeff Duncan and a few other people, Nick Underhill. But when you're missing your top running back, receiver, top 2 tackles, top defensive ends, and go down the list of things, I mean, it's going to be tough to win in the NFL. It already is. But if you're down so many playmakers, it doesn't matter who you put at quarterback, to be honest. I mean, you could play the perfect game. And Taysom played a pretty flawless game to the fourth quarter. He had that interception, but you could argue it was, went off of Kenny Still's hands. He should have caught it.
And it was a brilliant play. I mean, almost nothing you can do there.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those plays that just happened. But through 3 quarters, he played pretty mistake-free football. And you can argue, that blindside block call as well definitely factored into kind of their momentum being lost in the third quarter. But when it's all said and done, you just can't turn the ball over. And he did that. And he did in 3 consecutive possessions, and that was pretty much the game, because it wasn't like Dallas was doing anything special offensively. The Saints defense played well too. So I think, the quarterback change definitely gave him more energy and it helped the offense in the first half. But at the end of the day, Taysom really isn't the answer. Trevor Siemian really isn't the answer. You really can't do much when the injuries pile up and you make mistakes. So I think it's hard to pinpoint just the quarterback position and say, well, this is the reason they're losing, and obviously a win to making the change. But I don't know what the Saints do. They're kind of stuck now because if Taysom Hill is healthy, they'll probably play Taysom Hill. But if he continues to play like he did in the fourth quarter, do you go back to Simeon or do you kick the tire on Ian Book? So Saints are kind of in a tough position right now, even if, Taysom Hill, comes back from the injury, the finger injury, and is able to play. So the Saints, I think, are really – the expectations have to be set lower for them right now. They're not a healthy team.
I agree with you. And and the point is, frankly, if Taysom Hill goes back out there and he doesn't play well or he repeats this, turnover plague performance or whatever, it's going to be too late anyway. I mean, look, they've got 5 games left. They've probably got to win 4 of the 5 to that gets you to 9-8. I think 9-8 probably gets you in the NFC. And that's really the bit of good news as we look at the rest of these results. A lot of dogs barking, as you see on the right side of the screen there. The Vikings lose at Detroit. The 49ers lost in Seattle. The Eagles did win. They beat the Jets. And the Washington football team, this is really where it stings for a Saints fan because Brian Johnson hit the game-winning field goal for Washington, where if they lose, the Saints really, they lose to the Cowboys, but everybody else almost had easier opponents in that circle of NFC wildcard contenders. And everybody else lost too outside of the Eagles and then Washington. So if Brian Johnson misses that field goal like he missed plenty for the Saints earlier this year, it ends up being not that bad of a weekend for the Saints playoff hopes. Now, again, they got to play better anyway. I mean, we can't even talk about the playoffs unless, number one, they've got to go up to New Jersey and beat the Jets this week. They've got to do that. If they do that, then they've got the Bucs. Okay, that's going to be tough. But you at least set yourself up to the point where you can get to the final 3 weeks of the season, which is Carolina, Miami, Atlanta. And you have at least an outside shot of sweeping those 3 games, I would think, and getting yourself into the playoffs. But number one, you've got to beat the Jets, and you've just got to get a little bit healthier. I mean, we know Jameis Winston's not coming back. We know the receiving core is not going to be solved. But if you could get Ryan Ramczyk, Teron Armstead, Alvin Kamara, Marcus Davenport, if you could have them healthy for those last 3 games, and say you beat the Jets, lose to the Bucs, you're 6-8 at that point. Maybe all is not lost as far as making the playoffs. And that you've got to question, I guess, at some point, is it even worth it?
Yeah, I mean, and even more news just coming in. Deontay Harris suspended for 3 games for the DWI. And then Cam Jordan is supposedly going to hit the COVID list. So it's starting to pile up for the Saints. I mean, pretty much everything you think could go wrong is going wrong for the team this year. And Deontay Harris was the lone bright spot from the receiver spot against the Cowboys Thursday night. Now they're without him for 3 games. So Saints are continuing to take hits. And honestly, I mean, I think they can probably get three more wins realistically for sure. The Dolphins are playing better too, so that's not even a for sure win either. So it's going to be a tough sledding for the Saints coming down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amy Just, one of our Saints beat writers, just said it perfect. It's like 0 to 100 every day, and she's talking about the news cycle for the Saints, and it's like, I mean, Devin, you were on Twitter, you saw it. I mean, this literally just broke 3-4 minutes ago. Cam Jordan on the COVID list. He's vaccinated, so could he have 2 negative tests before Sunday? It's possible. It's not. I don't know that it's likely. He's got 6 days, so it's possible. And then Deontay Harris out, and he's one of the few playmakers they have left. Now maybe Alvin Kamara comes back, and you've got one there, but it's just an ugly situation right now. Obviously, the Jets game is a must-win. If you lose that one, you pack it in for the year, I think. Especially with the Sunday night game at Tampa Bay on the horizon, which I think will get flexed out of Sunday night, by the way. But it's not looking good right now for the Saints. The rest of those NFL results, real quick, the other one that kind of sticks out, actually a couple of them in the AFC, the Chargers taking it to the Bengals. That was a weird game. LA had a 24-0 lead. Cincinnati got that was in the second quarter. By the end of the third quarter, the Bengals had gotten all the way back to 24-22, and had a 2-point conversion to tie the game. Didn't get it, and then the Chargers raced away again. Bengals started turning the ball over, and the Chargers get a big win for the AFC playoff race. And then same thing down toward the bottom, the Steelers knocking off the Ravens. Ravens go for 2 at the end in the win and don't get it. So the AFC race just wide. That's why I say tonight's game, Patriots-Bills, may be for control of the AFC, because frankly, outside of those two teams and the Chiefs, I don't trust anybody in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming pretty much a 4-team race, and the Ravens have been playing pretty inconsistent as of late too. They start off the season hot and really have kind of cooled off as of late, and losing to the Bengals early a couple of weeks ago, and now losing to the Steelers. That's pretty crucial for the AFC North. I know they still are at the top of the NFC North, but it's getting more and more tight, and I mean, the Steelers are now in the playoff race as well in the AFC. So the AFC and I mean the middle of the pack for the NFC and AFC is insane. I mean, you got like 4 or 5 teams on each side of the coin that can make a playoff push. I mean, the Dolphins look like a team that can make a playoff push now. The Steelers as well. Those are 2 teams that look like they're going to be picking high in the NFL draft order earlier this year. So the Ravens losing that's a pretty crucial one. I think the Patriots are for now the 1 seed in the AFC until tonight's game. So we'll see what happens. But the Bills Patriots seems to be the battle for the 1 seed, and seems like they're going to be racing to win a division, try to get the top seed in the AFC as well.
Yeah, it's it's wild and crazy, and this is exactly what the NFL wanted when they added the 7th playoff spot in each conference. Although, frankly, even with only 6, it would still be kind of crazy right now because there's only really 4 good teams in each conference. You mentioned the Chiefs, Patriots, Bills, and then we'll throw the Titans in there in the AFC because their record is good, although they're not playing very well right now. They had the week off this week. And then in the NFC, you have Packers, Rams, Cowboys, and Bucks. And then after that, it drops off. So, man, it's a mess. It is absolutely a mess right now.
Yeah, this honestly, we might not know the playoff picture until the final hour of NFL Sunday in Week 17. I think it's really going to come down on both sides until the very last second of the very last snap on that Sunday or Sunday evening, I should say.
Yeah, and then they'll always put those games in the 3:25 window, the games that mean something, and so you got to watch all the way to the end. Yeah, it's a mess right now, and it will continue to be a mess. We're going to pivot and talk some college football here on Odds and Ends, and it's college football is always a mess, but it's less so, I think, this year than it normally is. It just so happened that it worked out. We talked about like you had kind of a very clear top 4. And that's because Alabama was able to stake its claim 41-24 over Georgia and outscored them, by the way, I think 38-7 over the middle 2 quarters of that game. I know they outscored them 24-7 in the second quarter and then just added to it in the third quarter. They are the number 1 seed in college football playoff. Michigan 42-3 over Iowa gets the number 2 seed. Cincinnati, first group of 5 team in. Although you've got to wonder if not for that result right below Cincinnati, Baylor holding off Oklahoma State by half a yard in the end. Does Oklahoma State get in over Cincinnati? I think they very well might have. I mean, literally, Cincinnati became the first group of 5 team to get in. All it took was go 12-0 and beat the team that's number 5 head-to-head. They beat Notre Dame head-to-head. If it weren't for that, if it weren't for the combination of those 2 things, I'm not so sure Cincinnati gets in. I mean, if they beat, let's say they scheduled, instead of Notre Dame, they had scheduled Pitt. Well, Pitt's a very good team. And if they beat Pitt, but I don't think a head-to-head win over Pitt gets them in. I think Notre Dame or Baylor maybe would be in that situation. And so it just proves how hard it is for a group of 5 team to get in. They had to go 12-0, 13-0 actually, and they had to beat head-to-head the team that was number 5, which, of course, you don't even know who that is coming into the year, right?
Yeah. I mean, you had no clue that they were going to even be as good this year, speaking on Notre Dame. So it was definitely a gamble for Cincinnati. Everything just had to work out perfectly, like we talked about even a month ago. We were still worried that Cincinnati still might not get in. And I mean, like you said, at like 3:30 on Saturday, it looked like they weren't going to get in because if they played a close game with Houston and then Oklahoma State finds a way to win that game against Baylor, they'll probably land Oklahoma State in over Cincinnati. And then you have pretty much a firestorm on social media on Sunday afternoon trying to figure out why Cincinnati didn't get in. But things went their way because, I mean, even – I think they would have had Alabama in even if they lost, but I think it would have been depending on the margin of victory. But yeah, Cincinnati had everything pretty much go their way to get in, and I think we're finally going to get them to see a chance. Now, in terms of the seeding, they did not get a favorable matchup. They're playing Alabama,
but we knew that. Yeah, I mean, they were going to get Alabama or Georgia. It was not going to be easy.
Yeah, and many thought that Michigan should be number one, but after what Bama did to Georgia, I pretty much knew that what was going to happen there. So Cincinnati has a tall task ahead of them, and they're going to need to pull out all the stops to try and stick with Bama.
What do you make of that argument, Devin, Michigan for number one? Was there a point Sunday night where you thought maybe they could get it, and do you think they deserved it?
I don't think at any point I thought they would get number one, just because I know how much the committee loves SEC teams. And the way they dominated Georgia really from the second quarter on, I knew that they were going to get the number one spot. For me, I think what held back Michigan just a little bit is the way they lost to Michigan State, because they had the lead and, Michigan State stormed back and won the game. Had it been like back and forth and they lost in like a last second field goal or something like that, I think it would be viewed a little bit differently. But I think the way they lost, if they lost the way that Bama lost to Texas A&M to Michigan State, I think it might have been a different argument.
And then also just a shout out to the UL Raging Cajuns winning the Sun Belt in Billy Napier's final game in Lafayette. They name their new head coach as well after the game. And I mean, just to speak to the job Billy Napier did, 7 one-score wins this year. They were 7-0 in games decided by 8 points or fewer, and this was the 7th one. And so UL gets to go to the New Orleans Bowl, where they will play Marshall on December the 18th. And really just they have become very adept at controlling games with their running game and their defense.
Yeah, UL, and we had talked about it on At the Book. I thought UL was going to come out and play inspired, and they did. But it really took the defense there at the end to kind of seal it for them, and it kind of made sense for the way the season went for them. Like you said, they had 7 one-score wins this year, and it wasn't pretty all the time, but they found ways to get it done. And I feel like that's kind of the way Billy Napier coaches. It's not going to be flashy. It's not going to be over the top. It's just going to be very consistent and pretty straightforward on the way they play football. So, kind of best of luck to him at Florida. I think he'll do great things there, be able to recruit. I believe he's taken the UL offensive coordinator with him to Florida. It might have been defensive coordinator, but he's taken a few coaches with him to Florida as well. So definitely best of luck to him. But I think UL is in good hands with their next coach.
Yeah, Michael DeSormo, who was the Cajuns co-offensive coordinator, is the man who is the Raging Cajuns' new head coach. And he went to Catholic New Iberia. He's a local guy. You can tell just by the name DeSormo, we're talking about a Cajun through and through. And so he's the new guy in Lafayette. And really, you have to say it's a good choice. You want continuity as much as possible from the Napier era, which has been obviously the best in the history of UL Lafayette football. So it's I think still a good choice for them, and we'll see what Billy Napier can do at Florida. Let's turn our attention to the playoff now. Let's talk playoff. We talked Michigan being the number 2 seed instead of number 1. It was pretty clear that the committee was going to do whatever they could to avoid an Alabama-Georgia rematch in the semifinals. Now, we may still get that in the championship game, but I think if they had determined Michigan was number 1 over Alabama, you would have seen Cincinnati be the number 3 over Georgia, just to avoid that rematch, so that it was going to be Alabama, Cincinnati, and Georgia, Michigan, no matter what. It's interesting we see the odds here, though. There is no odds-on favorite now, where everybody's plus money. Georgia was minus 220 last week. They're up to plus 135. Alabama, your slight favorite at plus 120. And then Michigan and Cincinnati, their odds only go down slightly from last week. And I think that partly has to do with the fact that we weren't sure last week if Alabama was going to get in. Now that we know they're in, this field is tougher on paper than it would have been had, say, Notre Dame gotten in or Oklahoma State gotten in. But knowing that one of those teams is going to have to beat Alabama and then Georgia, or Georgia and then Alabama, makes Michigan and Cincinnati long shots at this point.
Yeah, I think when you look at kind of this odds list, I think Michigan is probably the best value because they definitely have the defense to win in the running game. And I think, going into that game, and we're going to talk about lines a little bit later in the show, but, going to that game, a lot of people are going to still think Georgia is still a really good team. Michigan, we know kind of the history with Jim Harbaugh in big games, but he's kind of quelled that this year. I mean, his biggest games of the year, minus the Michigan State game, they've come to play and played really well. So I think Michigan is probably the best value on this board. Cincinnati, for me, I think they would have had a little bit of a better chance, I think, in terms of, kind of value if they weren't playing Alabama first. But just knowing that they're playing Bama first and Alabama felt like they were the underdog going into that Georgia game, they're going to continue kind of that mindset. And, I would be worried about, putting money down for Cincinnati. But Michigan, I think, is the biggest wild card of these four teams because of how well they've been playing the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I will say, I think Michigan's plus 7.5 against Georgia. That strikes me as too many points. I mean, I maybe that's recency bias just looking at the last game that they each played, but Michigan sure seems like they shouldn't be laying 7.5 points or getting 7.5 points against anybody.
Yeah, they've been stellar all season long. I mean, even their loss to Michigan State played them right down to the wire. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if that line moves at all over the next couple weeks, and see kind of what happens there. I also think for Georgia, it could change as well if they decide to make a quarterback change. So we'll see what happens kind of with the line and how that moves. But just based on how well Michigan's defense has played this year, 7.5 seems way too much in that game.
Yeah, no, I mean, but you bring up an interesting point. Stetson Bennett played the SEC championship game. Would they go back to JT Daniels at quarterback? I don't. Georgia's offense wasn't really the problem for me. They had almost 400 yards of offense. They had 24 points. I think going in, a lot of us chose, I think I had 23-20 Georgia. So I thought 24 points would be enough for them to win that game. The surprising part, of course, was that Bryce Young and Alabama were able to move the ball so easily on them. I do think there's some value in Georgia here. They're a plus. You can get them at plus money now. Yes, it's a tough game against Michigan and then probably Alabama again. But is there logic in thinking, Devin, that maybe Alabama held something? I mean, I'm sorry, that Georgia held something back against Alabama, that you don't show off everything and you don't switch quarterbacks to Daniels, even though maybe the opportunity was there to do that. Throw a few new looks at Bryce Young. If you can get past Michigan, get to Indianapolis on January 10th, maybe Georgia plays a different game and can win that game.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough because I think Alabama knows how to attack Georgia now. So it's really going to be about can they just generate a better pass rush? I think that's what it came down to, that Bryce Young had way too much time in the pocket for Alabama, and he was able to pick them apart. But also Jameson Williams, receiver from Alabama, he was left way too many times wide open over the middle, getting behind the defense. So there's going to have to be a different plan, and they're going to have to find different ways to attack the Alabama defense as well. I think they underestimated a little bit of what they can do stopping the run specifically and passing. I mean, the teams that have had success on Alabama this year have passed the football. And I think Stetson Bennett does a good job of managing the game. And if he's able to run the ball, they can run play action off of it. But if their plan is to attack Alabama's secondary in a potential rematch in the national championship game, I would think they would probably go to Daniels and try to attack him that way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be super interesting. Georgia, Michigan in the Orange Bowl is going to be fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to the Cotton Bowl, too, with Cincinnati and Alabama to see, can the Bearcats compete with them? I mean, I happen to think 13.5 is too much for that game. I don't think Cincinnati wins the game, and I have to do a little more research before I make like an official pick or I actually put some money down on it. But I feel like going into that thing, that strikes me as too many points. I would have handicapped Cincinnati more as like a +9 or a +10. If that thing gets up over 14, which I think it very well might with the type of money that usually comes in on Alabama, I would be willing to take Cincinnati with those points. One thing that's not interesting as we move on odds and ends anymore, it was interesting all year long. It's not anymore, is the Heisman race. And Bryce Young took care of that. Even as recently as 2 weeks ago, I mean, you could not name a favorite. And then Bryce Young had a huge game against Arkansas. Looked like the favorite, although at the same time, C.J. Stroud for Ohio State had a huge game against Michigan State. Last week, Bryce Young became the odds-on favorite when Ohio State lost that game to Michigan. But, he was only like -180. Aiden Hutchinson was hanging out there. We might have had a defensive winner. Like, let's say Georgia just thumped Alabama and Bryce Young looked bad or he got hurt or something. We very well could have had Aiden Hutchinson winning the Heisman. But instead, what happened was Bryce Young looked fantastic, took control of the race, and now all of a sudden what looked like a wide open race for 15 weeks is basically Bryce Young and everybody else just trying to get to New York for the ceremony.
Yeah, he pretty much wrapped it up with that performance against Georgia. And it definitely seemed kind of in peril, before he had the game-winning drive or the game-tying drive against Auburn before overtime. Before that point, I mean, you could have made an argument for C.J. Stroud, Aiden Hutchinson maybe from Michigan. But now I think Bryce Young is pretty much sealed in. At this point, it's just about him winning it. And it's crazy to think with all the quarterbacks Alabama had recently, he'll be the first one to win the Heisman. They had Tua, they had Jalen Hurts, and both have gone on to and start in the NFL now. And him as a redshirt freshman doing what he's doing, we thought Tua was on that trajectory before injuries kind of robbed him of his college career. Bryce Young doing it now for Bama, I think, is a testament to what Alabama has been able to do recruiting wise and change their philosophy going after quarterbacks. So I think he's definitely at this point, it's pretty much a formality that he's going to win. But it definitely seemed like it was in the air in the middle or towards the end of that Auburn game, and with how well Aiden Hutchinson and C.J. Stroud kind of played down the stretch too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't see any reason to bet on any of these long shots. They're all big payoffs. But we know at this point that it's going to be Bryce Young. And Alabama will become just the third school to have back-to-back Heisman winners after Devontae Smith won it last year. The other two, of course, are Oklahoma, which has done it twice, and then Ohio State with Archie Griffin in back-to-back years in 74 and 75. Oklahoma most recently, of course, with Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray doing it in 17 and 18, and now we'll have Alabama with back-to-back Heisman. So that's just about wrapped up. We're kind of in a holding pattern now in college football. We've got still almost 4 weeks to go until we get to the college football playoff on New Year's Eve. And we've got a couple of weeks before we get any bowl games. But we will take a look at some lines. One thing we have coming up Saturday is Army-Navy. Army is 7.5-point favorite. And that game is Saturday afternoon at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. And then just put some other bowl games up here of interest. The Raging Cajuns, 6-point favorites at the Superdome against Marshall. We mentioned the lines for the CFP semifinals there on New Year's Eve. Rose Bowl, Ohio State -6.5 against Utah on New Year's Day. And then LSU gets its marching orders under interim coach Brad Davis. They will play the last bowl game, before the championship game, of course. The last bowl game on January 4th in Houston, the Texas Bowl, LSU laying 2.5 against K-State. Anything stick out to you on this list, Devin, outside of those semifinal games?
The Utah-Ohio State game. With bowl season, it's going to be really interesting how to pick some of these games because you got to factor in on how much interest these teams will have in playing in them. Because a team like Ohio State, they were a quarter away from making it to the Big Ten championship, back to the playoff. They had a disappointing fourth quarter against Michigan and let it get away. also had a disappointing loss against Oregon as well. So are they going to be motivated to play that game and, kind of come back and finish the season off right? I think that's going to be an interesting one because I know Utah is going to be juiced up for the game. A lot of people didn't expect them to be at the Rose Bowl. They thought Oregon was going to run away with this, especially after beating Ohio State earlier in the year. So I think that's going to be a line to watch because I'm tempted to take Utah because I'm tired of not taking them and they ended up not only covering but winning straight out. But I think that game is the one to watch for sure. LSU game, same thing. Will these teams be motivated to play? They play kind of that last bowl game before we, turn our attention to the college football playoff. I think LSU will come ready to play. I mean, they want to, look good for the interim coach as well and the new head coach Brian Kelly. But we'll see who's all going to be playing in that game too, because they've had a ton of injuries too this season. So I think those are the two games on this list that stick out to me, especially the Utah game. I think Utah can not only cover, they can flat out win that game too.
No, I mean, I think those are great points. You can't necessarily treat betting on bowl games the same way you do all year long because motivation, you almost have to become like an amateur psychologist. Which team is going to show up, which team doesn't have its coach. Is that going to matter? I mean, like I sort of thought that Billy Napier with one foot out the door might affect the Raging Cajuns in a negative way on Saturday. Obviously it didn't. They played hard for him. But now that he's going to have both feet out the door and it's going to be a new coach for UL, does that make a difference? I don't know. Does it make a difference for LSU that they don't have Brian Kelly yet? You kind of have to judge the psyche of these teams. And it's too bad Jim's not here today. Of course, he'll be back on Thursday, we hope. Jim Derry out sick today, but he tells me he loves to bet on bowl games. He's always had a lot of success with it. I hate it. I've never had success with betting on bowl games because you're trying to gauge that motivation of these 18 to 21-year-olds, and even more so nowadays that you have all these opt-outs. Guys who are NFL draft hopefuls, which, by the way, the NFL draft, we've talked about it a couple times, starts April 28th at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. So the Caesars Sportsbook will have a big presence there. But you just don't know how these teams are going to react to the situation. And that's the difficult thing. I think you really got to pick your spots when betting on bowl games. And we'll do so over the next couple of weeks. We'll have a lot of fun with it. How about Army-Navy? Army favored by 7.5. They've had a much better season than Navy, but that's one of those games you just throw out the records.
Yeah, I would probably take Navy to cover in this one because I don't think it's going to be one of those games that you just run away with. And they tend to be pretty good games. I think Army is clearly the better team, though. But I think Navy will come ready to play, and obviously they want to win the game because there's been years that Navy's been the better team, but Army won. So that game could go either way, and I think I would take Navy if I had to choose between the two teams on who would cover or not. But that'll be an old school kind of old fashioned game. A lot of option in that one, and game will go by quickly. A lot of run plays.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about it. Of course, the last couple of years it has been blowouts. Army winning 15-0 last year, and then Navy winning 31-7 the year before that. So blowouts can happen in that game, but we'll see Army favored by 7.5. You're watching Odds and Ends on Bet.NOLA.com, brought to you by the Caesars Sportsbook. Talked a lot of college football here today. Let's circle back and end the show with some more NFL discussion. Of course, tonight's game, Patriots Bills, very, very big in the AFC race, probably big for a lot of fantasy playoff pictures too. I don't know that I'd want to be relying on somebody in tonight's game. Luckily, I'm not in any of my leagues because that wind and now some snow coming in Buffalo, it looks super nasty. But let's look ahead to Week 14. I did want to correct something I said earlier. I said there were 4 top teams in each conference and then a mess after that. The NFC really has 5 top teams. You have the Cardinals at 10-2, Packers and Bucks both 9-3, and then Cowboys and Rams both 8-4, and then you get the drop off. So it's really only the 2 spots that are available in those last 2 playoff spots. And really, if you want to throw the Ravens into the AFC, you have 5 teams that have 4 losses in the AFC before you get down to the 5-loss teams. And so, just to correct myself there are really 5 teams that are solidly in the picture at this point. Saints are favorites again. This is the first time they've been favorites since they played Atlanta in Trevor Siemian's first start. They're road favorites up at the Jets by 6. I do wonder this, as you see at the bottom of the screen, this line is from 1 p.m. today. With the news of Cam Jordan and Deontay Harris, probably not big movement on that game, but maybe you see a half point worth of movement or a full point down to 5 if some money comes in on the Jets. Elsewhere, some big games. We talked about Monday Night Football. It'll be good again, Rams and Cardinals. Rams probably last chance if they're going to compete in the AFC West. They'll have to win in Arizona. Otherwise, they'd be 3 games down with just 4 games to go. And then, of course, the big one, Devin, Bills at Bucks. We'll see. The Bills will be on a short week and on the road. But that'll be interesting.
That'll definitely be the game of the week, along with the Rams and Cardinals. They have a great slate of NFL action, and it couldn't come out at a perfect time. Kind of a lull with college football as we wait for the bowl games to start up. This is a perfect week for them to kind of grab the audience's attention and kind of focus now fully on the NFL. But yeah, there's a lot of great matchups this week. I think the line that stands out to me is probably Cowboys -4 against Washington. Washington's played fantastic football as of late. I think they've won 4 straight games and have really supplanted themselves in the thick of the NFC race, or the playoff race, I should say. And they have done a really nice job since the bye week of kind of, resetting and getting some crucial wins. So that game is going to be big, obviously, for the NFC East. And the playoff picture, so that'll be one to watch. And then the Bills and Bucks, that line could change depending on what happens tonight with the Bills. The Bills were to go ahead and blow out the Patriots. I think you'll get closer to a pick 'em for that game. So we'll see what happens, but could be a potential Super Bowl matchup as well later in the season.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in fact, I think those teams may still be the favorites in their respective conferences. At Caesars Sportsbook, I have to double check on that, but I don't think the Cardinals or Patriots or Titans or anybody else have supplanted those teams. So, good call there. And the other thing I'll point out, look, things are dreary for the Saints. We broke it down. They are. They're bad right now. And if you lose to the Jets, the season is essentially over, and you're looking forward to that NFL draft on April 28th at that point. However, if the Saints should beat the Jets. Now, nothing ever goes as according to plan in the NFL. There's very rarely chalk. But let's just pretend for a minute that chalk holds here. The Saints win in New York. The Cowboys win in Landover, Maryland. They beat Washington. And the Bengals, who are 1-point favorites against the Niners, let's say they beat the Niners. Well, the Eagles are off, and Carolina and Atlanta play each other. So one of them will win, one of them will lose. The Saints' playoff picture looks a heck of a lot better in 7 days if the favorites win all those games. The Saints win, Cowboys win, Bengals win, Eagles are off. All of a sudden, and I know the Saints have to turn around and play Tampa Bay the next week, but all of a sudden you look at it and say, man, maybe they're not out of this. If you trying to get to the 7 seed is something you're interested in.
Yeah, they have to pretty much run the table at this point, because I think when you think about one of the Eagles or Washington's going to knock each other off, because I think they still have to play twice this year.
I think you're right.
So you would assume that one of them is just going to fall off the kind of the NFC picture. The Vikings can't figure themselves out. I mean, they're losing to the Lions.
They play Thursday this week, by the way. They got Pittsburgh on Thursday.
So that's a tough draw as well. If you're the Saints, you try and win this week. Figure out if you can get something done against Tampa again. I mean, the first win was hard enough, but this one is even going to be more tough. So that'll be one probably not going to win. But I mean, 4 out of the last 5 games is winnable for the Saints. It's there for them to take, and if they can run the table and win 4 of the last 5, they definitely have a chance with tiebreakers, especially if it comes down to Washington and them. Saints will have the tiebreaker against Washington if both of them finish. I believe it will be 9-8. So there's a chance. It's possible, but
Yeah,
they
and let's
got to figure it out.
Yeah, we're not trying to blow sunshine up anybody's you know what. I mean, it is dreary for the Saints right now, and they are not playing well enough to win 4 out of 5 against anybody right now. However, things change quickly in the NFL. Listen, 5 weeks ago they were 5-2 and had just beaten the Bucs with Trevor Siemian playing more than half the game. If they can get healthy, things can change. It's not over. And I encourage you all to look at NOLA.com /Saints. Amy just has a sort of a playoff picture. I think 538 has them at 14% to win to make the playoffs. ESPN is similar. It's like 18%. I mean, they have a chance, but it's going to have to start number one with a win in New Jersey this weekend, and they're going to need to get some help. And then they probably, unless they win in Tampa Bay, are going to have to win those last 3 games against Carolina, Miami, and Atlanta. But that's not impossible if they get healthy. That's what we're saying. We're not trying to blow sunshine. It's not a good situation, especially compared to what it was a month ago, but it's also not over. So that's really where we're at. A couple of things I mentioned, by the way, that Thursday night game, the Vikings are 3-point favorites over the Steelers. That's on Thursday night in Minnesota. And then your conference favorites, it is indeed Tampa Bay. They're plus 260 to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Slight favorites over Green Bay at plus 350 and Arizona at plus 380. And then in the AFC, it's actually Kansas City at 3-1 to win the AFC, followed by Buffalo plus 375 and New England plus 450. So right now, not quite a Bills-Bucks prediction from the odds makers, but pretty close that game next week. And if the Bills win tonight, it could be Bills-Bucks, both being their conference favorites. Speaking of which, before we go, Devin, let's make our prediction for Monday Night Football. Patriots, Bills, what you got?
I got the Bills winning. I think they are going to find a way to win the game and be able to move the ball in the Patriots defense. And I think they'll turn Mac Jones over a few times in this game as well. I think they have something to prove. They've been a little shaky on primetime this year. I know they beat the Saints on Thanksgiving, but against the Titans, that was a very winnable game earlier in the year as well. And I just think they're at the point where they kind of have to make their run and start getting hot and getting ready for a deep playoff run. So I got the Bills winning over the Patriots 27-24.
All right, 20. So a little bit of a high-scoring game, and I'm with you there. I think this total's going too low. If I had to, like I said, if it goes under 40, I'm going to consider sprinkling something on the over. But I like the Patriots. I've liked them all week, and I do think they win this game. I'm going to go somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, 23-20 Patriots. So that's what I've got for tonight. It's going to be a great Monday Night Football game. This has been Odds and Ends on bet.nola.com. We're brought to you by the Caesars Sportsbook. And once again, like to remind you that you can download the Caesars Sportsbook app now in Louisiana. Go to NOLA.com/Caesars. Offering a $100 bonus are the fine folks at Caesars. A $100 free bet bonus when betting goes live. Expect that to be about a month from now. And keep it tuned to bet.nola.com for all the news on that and on everything sports betting. We're going to have a college football bowl betting preview out this week that Jim's working on. He will, of course, have his NFL picks. And then I'll be back tomorrow with Spencer for the fantasy roundup at 3:30. And then on Thursday at the book, Devin, you'll be live at Harrah's New Orleans at 4 o'clock. And we will preview the weekend. We're going to talk Army-Navy. We're going to talk Saints-Jets and everything else that you can handle from the weekend. Start to get into some NBA and college basketball talk as well as we get into December. So we hope you all have a good day. And for Devin Jackson, I'm Zach Ewing. We'll catch you next time.